Welcome to this web lecture about the usability principle of aesthetic and minimalist design. You may think that a nice interface needs fancy graphics, right, really beautiful icons and such. But in fact, a clean, simple graphical design is much easier to understand and also to recognize the elements later. There's a nice example of a move that we see from fancy display, fancy icons to simpler icons in macOS. The upcoming version of macOS, which is called Yosemite, is moving from the 3D look of the dock with detailed icons towards a simpler 2D look together with icons taken from iOS that have a simpler design. This is easier on the eyes, and the icons in the end are easier to recognize. Minimalist design also applies to a process, to keep the process, the dialogue with the user simple. Here we see an example where that dialogue has been indeed kept simple, and it's hard for users to make any mistake. When you walk up to this ATM and you insert a card, the first thing it asks is whether you want English or Russian. It also shows these small arrows, right, to point you to the buttons that are next to the screen. No one will make a mistake in this first step of the dialogue with the ATM. Next to that is an ATM from a different bank. And it starts, after you insert the card, with a very cluttered display. A display with lots of text in Russian, which I cannot read, and an image that seems to indicate you should cover the keypad with your hand so that people cannot eavesdrop on you typing the PIN. And then it has this field, which is clearly the field for entering your PIN. So you are tempted to start this dialogue by entering your PIN, hoping to see a switch to English language later. Unfortunately, the switch to English is actually on this screen, and at the bottom right, it looks like it's a touch button, but in fact you have to touch the button next to the screen. Once you miss this, once you enter your PIN and continue, it's impossible to switch to English anymore. So by changing the process here, and by creating a display that is confusing, because it first, reading from top to bottom, first seemed to ask for the PIN, right? You end up missing a very important action, at least when you don't speak Russian. Another way in which you can do it wrong with aesthetic and minimalist design is overuse of colors and introduction of clutter. What we see on this slide is the standard presentation template of the TOE. It has way too much white space around the title. So I am, in my presentations, using a more compact version of this style, which has less white space, well, blue space actually, around the title. The footer in the standard template is also way too large, right? I'm using a compact footer. The standard display has a larger footer, which wastes vertical space. The end result is that in the standard TOE style, less than 60% of the vertical space is left for the actual content of the slide. That is not a good design, right? And essentially, all this decoration serves no real purpose. Applications often also contain levels or layers, like in menus. You have to balance the length of menus with many items versus creating sub-menus. You also don't want a menu with sub-menu with sub-menu with sub-menu. The users will get lost in this forest, right, of menus that you create. When you use pop-ups, only use them when really necessary. What we often see in the final assignments for this course, when we create a mobile thermostat, is that spinners are used, and they're used as pop-ups. So you want to enter a time, pop, you get a pop-up that shows a spinner, whereas the spinner could also have been shown inline in the underlying window. Right? So only use pop-ups if you can't do the dialogue inline. Avoid pop-ups generated by pop-ups. Right? The dialogue should be shallow, not only in terms of menus, but also in terms of dialog boxes that call up other dialog boxes. So in your final project, we don't want to see artifacts like the one on the slide here, where finishing the dialog by clicking OK in this pop-up only causes another pop-up with the same message, right, to appear, and this dialog continues indefinitely. Thank you for participating.